أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وأفضل الصلوات وتم التسليمات على المبعوث رحمة للعالمين سيدنا محمد بن عبد الله الهادي إلى الصراط المستقيم، وعلى آله وأصحابه حق قدره ومقداره العظيم. ثم أما بعد. So alhamdulillah, we have completed 1/3 of Ramadan, and we are now into the middle 10 days, where some of the riwayahs indicate that these are the 10 days of maghfirah. The first 10 days are days of rahmah, and the last 10 days are idqun min an-nar, or emancipation from the hellfire. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us and have mercy upon us and emancipate us from the hellfire. So the attribute or the trait we're looking at in this session, the 11th session, as-siyam. And obviously that makes a lot of sense. Here in the month of Ramadan, fasting is mentioned several times in the Quran. The verse that prescribes fasting as an obligation in Surah Al-Baqarah, قوله تعالى يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. Oh, you believe, fasting has been prescribed upon you as has been prescribed upon those before you, so that you may achieve taqwa. And taqwa, as we have mentioned, in its essence is amal al-qalb. It's a matter and an action of the heart, a type of awareness and uns and intimacy with the divine presence that then informs all of your actions, especially for your ability to stay away from trouble, to stay away from sins, and to fulfill the commands that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has asked us to fulfill. And as the verse indicates, fasting is an ancient tradition, an ancient religious ritual. All of the previous all of the communities before us were prescribed to fast in one form or another. And in fact, some of the narrations indicate that our fasting is an easier version of fasting that came before. Previous communities, like the community of Bani Israel, the tribes of Israel, the sons and daughters of Sayyidina Yaqub, alayhi salam, had a type of fasting that also included fasting from speech. And we know this from the verse that Maryam alayhi salam, when she was informed of this miraculous birth that will happen, and then seemingly to vow an expiation, she said, إِنِّي نَذَرْتُ لِلرَّحْمَنِ صَوْمًا فَلَنْ أُكَلِّمَ الْيَوْمَ إِنْسِيًّا. I have vowed a vow of silence, so I will speak to no one. And this is when the baby spoke in the cradle, baby Jesus Isa alayhi salam. And when they said to her, لَقَدْ جِئْتِ شَيْئًا فَرِيًّا يَا أُخْتَ هَارُونَ مَا كَانَ أَبُوكَ امْرَأَ سَوْءٍ وَمَا كَانَتْ أُمُّكِ بَغِيًّا فَأَشَارَتْ إِلَيْهِ قالوا كيف نكلم من كان في المهد صبيا قال إني عبد الله. So she came with the baby in the cradle, baby Jesus, and they said, your father was a good man and your mother was not this type of woman. And she didn't speak, and she pointed to Jesus alayhi salam, and he spoke. And they said, how can we speak to someone who's in the cradle? Then he spoke and he said, Inni abdullah, I am the servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ also practiced a sort of fasting that was not prescribed for the rest of the ummah, the rest of the community, what's called siyam al-wisal, in which he joined 2 or 3 days together without breaking his fast at Maghrib. Some of the others of the ummah, of the Sahaba, tried to do the same, and the Prophet ﷺ forbade them, and when they tried to do it, they were unable to do it. So what we have, which is fasting from Fajr, from dawn until Maghrib, from eating and drinking and intimate relations, you could consider to be a more moderate form, a wasat. This is a deen, or more wasat. Our deen is characterized by having things that are balanced and are the best, and so this type of fasting is the best type of fasting, the fasting of the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And you will find fasting also mentioned in the Quran for other reasons, usually as an expiation for something. And an expiation, which is the idea of fidya or kafara, when someone has some oath that they broke, for example, in terms of oaths. If you make an oath or a vow, and then you have to break it, then an expiation that would make up for that would be fasting. قوله تعالى في سورة المائدة لا يؤاخذكم الله باللغو في أيمانكم ولكن يؤاخذكم بما عقدتم الأيمان فكفارته إطعام 10 مساكين من أوسط ما تطعمون أهليكم أو كسوتهم أو تحرير رقبة فمن لم يجد فصيام 3 أيام. So كفارة الأيمان, someone breaking a vow that they made and then they were not able to fulfill it, then they should feed 10 people, or back when they were people were in bondage, to free someone who was in bondage. And if they're unable to do that, فَمَنْ لَمْ يَجِدْ فَصِيَامُ 3 أَيَّامٍ, then fasting 3 days also suffices as a kafara. Also in the Hajj, if someone kills an animal, hunts an animal while they're in a state of ihram, then عدل ذلك صياما ليذوق وبال أمري, someone who's unable to do the kafara, which is fast to feed other people or to sacrifice an animal, then they would have to fast. And also for the dhihar that's mentioned in Surah Al-Mujadila, which was a jahili practice of how some men would forswear their wives. فَمَنْ لَمْ يَجِدْ فَصِيَامُ شَهْرَيْنِ مُتَتَابِعَيْنِ مِنْ قَبْلِ أَنْ يَتَمَاسَّ. So if they're unable to do the original expiations of feeding and so forth, people, then they would fast 2 consecutive months. So we see that fasting then has this idea of purification, of even in the case, as we saw, of someone who had another type of ibadah or another type of religious ritual or action that they were unable to fulfill or they contravened for another reason, then fasting would be one of the prescribed ways to expiate that. And kafara means basically to give you a clean slate. So this idea of purification is one of the main themes of fasting. Qadi Abu Bakr Ibn Arabi also mentioned some hadith here that he feels epitomizes fasting. We'll mention them here. قال صلى الله عليه وسلم كل عمل ابن آدم له إلا الصوم فإنه لي وأنا أجزي به يدعو شهوته وطعامه وشرابه من أجلي. So that first hadith, all of the deeds, all of the acts of the sons and daughters of Adam are for them or for him, except fasting, because it is for me. So this is hadith Qudsi, Allah is saying this is for me. وَأَنَا أَجْزِي بِهِ, and I will be the one to reward it. I will take upon how I reward that. يَدْعُ شَهْوَتَهُ وَطَعَامَهُ وَشَرَابَهُ مِنْ أَجْلِي. He forsakes or leaves aside their shahwa, their desire, their food and their drink, min ajli, purely for me. And in another hadith, لِلصَّائِمِ فَرْحَتَانِ فَرْحَةٌ عَنْدِ إِفْطَارِهِ وَفَرْحَةٌ عَنْدِ لِقَاءِ رَبِّهِ وَلَخَلُوفَ لِلصَّائِمِ أَطْيَبُ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ مِنْ رِيحِ الْمِسْكِ. For the fasting person, there are 2 happinesses, or 2 moments of happiness, or 2 times of happiness. So they are happy when they break their fast, and they will also be happy when they meet their Lord. وَلَخَلُوفَ لِلصَّائِمِ, so when someone is fasting during the day and haven't had something to eat, then they may have some, sort of unpleasant breath. So that unpleasant breath of the fasting person is atyab. It's more beautiful and more sweet smelling to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than rih al-misk, than the smell of musk. And in the third hadith, وَالصِّيَامُ جُنَّةٌ. الصِّيَامُ جُنَّةٌ. So الصِّيَامُ جُنَّةٌ means siyam is a protection. So the Shaykh mentions that there are at least 11 different traits or khisal or specific things about fasting that are mentioned in this hadith that you don't find in any other act of worship. So there's a uniqueness to fasting. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't say about anything else, at least in the narrations that we have at our disposal, that as-siyamu li wa ana ajzi bih. Fasting is specifically for me, and I will be the one to reward it. Or that all of the deeds of Ibn Adam are for him except this. And there's different interpretations about what this actually means. Some of them said that as-siyamu ibadat al-tark, that fasting is an act of worship that really is epitomized by forsaking or abandoning something. In other words, not doing something. So you can't tell a fasting person from a non-fasting person except the food is presented before them. But otherwise, there's nothing visually that you can make out that somebody is fasting. So they say this type of ibadah then is abad min al-riya, further away from ostentation. So it's something that is inherently more sincere because there is very little allotment for the ego in it. You can't really show off by fasting. I mean, one can, presumably, but certainly in the month of Ramadan, when in a Muslim majority country or a Muslim society where the expectation that everybody is fasting, it's not really something that's going to set you aside from everybody else. It's not going to be something that's going to make you unique. But it does come with its trials and its tribulation, and obviously to leave something as beloved as our life force, food and drink, then this is a challenge. And sometimes it's more of a challenge for some people than others. And so this is, in a sense then, something further away from ostentation. Another interpretation is that this is the attribute of the angels. Angels don't have a need to eat or to drink, and they don't. And we know that our hearts are in the dunya, but they're not of the dunya, our spiritual hearts, that is. And so our spiritual hearts are more connected to the akhirah, more connected to the malakut, more connected to the realm where food and drink are not necessary. And if there is food and drink, then it's merely for pleasure. The people of paradise will not eat and drink because they need to eat and drink to keep them alive. Rather, they will only eat and drink simply or purely for pleasure. And we know that pleasure is associated with eating and drinking in this life, but it will be of a whole another degree and magnitude in the next life. So fasting in that sense is kind of putting you in the mode, as it were, for the next life, for the akhirah. And indeed, when you do break your fast, at Maghrib time, it's quite different than eating at any other time and when you were not fasting. And perhaps that's what's kind of indicated in the other hadith, لِلصَّائِمِ فَرْحَتَانِ فَرْحَةٌ عَنْدَ إِفْطَارِهِ. So this happiness or this farha, one breaks their fast. Another opinion that's mentioned about how the siyamu li wa ana ajzi bih, fasting is purely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also has nothing of the human traits, and so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't have eating or drinking either. And the Quran instructs us to be Rabbani. كونوا ربانيا بما كنتم تعلمون الكتاب وبما كنتم تدرسون. Be Rabbani, be more Lord-like. In other words, take on more of the Rabbani-like traits in as much as we can take them on, which are patience and forbearance and mercy, which are really the attributes of Jamal and not the attributes of Jalal. The attributes of Jalal being the attributes of magnificence and awe, those are specifically for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the attributes of Jamal. And fasting teaches you patience and forbearance. Nisfu sabr siyam in one of the hadith, that half of forbearance and patience is fasting. So if you can learn to be fasting and learn to be patient with your own passions and your desires, then one can learn also to be patient with other people's desires and wants. And that's usually what gets us into trouble. People will confront us with what they want and what they need and what they think is important, and we want to put our needs above their needs. But if we're able to handle our own needs and put them to the side for a bit, and then work on this principle of ithar, which is to prefer others over yourself, especially in matters of hadh nafs, things that are allotment for the ego, things of the dunya, then you have put yourself in a position to be like the Rabbaniyin, to be like the people who have taken on more of these Lord-like divine qualities, that in as much as they can be actualized within a human being by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in this blessed month of fasting and this blessed month of qiyam, standing in prayer, and the connection of the Quran to fasting, and when we reach the last 10 days also the principle of i'tikaf, of complete cut off from everything and remaining within the masjid purely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, maintaining one's fast and reading the Quran and contemplating one's existence and thinking about the myriad blessings that they have been given, then all of this inshallah will bode well for you and for me and for the rest of the ummah, the rest of the community. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make that facilitated and make it easy and make it actualized. إنه ولي ذلك والقادر عليه والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.